Hey, it's been a while since I did an episode of Sound Scene, but it was summer, and that's about the only excuse I have. So we're back with a totally different episode to what we've done before. It's a bit of a nerdy one, but I really liked it. This episode's on advertising and the role that music supervision plays in commercial content, from big-time Super Bowl TV commercials to branded content for social media, and what the future holds too, what with all this TikTok, AI, NFT, VR stuff going on. But I spoke with Josh Rabinowitz, a music supervisor and producer who's had a storied career in the world of advertising. Josh has worked for almost 15 years at the global advertising firm Grey Group, heading up their music division at a time when music and advertising was evolving from like jingles and very cheesy stuff to really fucking good music in advertising. We chart that evolution in our conversation, going from the jingles to the big cultural moments that were delivered courtesy of music in advertising. Everything from Nick Drake's song Pink Moon and the watershed moment that was in advertising to the iconic Apple iPod ads. We also speak about the music in a specific ad that Josh worked on with Yahoo, and we talk about how artists these days are embracing advertising as part of their careers and not as afraid of selling out as back in the day. We also walk through the music supervision process in the world of advertising, which is super interesting and very different to the process for film or for TV. Josh also has been an adjunct professor at the New School since 2008, and he offers one-on-one coaching for those looking to enter the music biz. So if anyone is listening to this and wants some kind of guidance, Josh does this online or in person if you live in New York, and you can do this by going to his website, which is brooklynmusicexperience.com, which is the name of the music and sound consultancy which Josh launched through the pandemic. Very aptly named as well, with the quintessential New York sirens you can hear during our chat. It was super nice talking to Josh. He's very eloquent, energetic dude. And so yeah, without any further ado, let's get into it.
Sound scene.
Sound scene. Sound scene.
All right, Josh, thanks for coming on Sound Scene.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
So firstly, I feel like it'd be a good place to start if you could give us kind of a whirlwind tour of your career as a music supervisor. Like what initially interested you about it and where you started, and then kind of more chiefly how you got into the whole world of advertising and what you're up to now.
Sure. It's interesting. I got into music and media as a fan of film. Mm-hmm. And I saw some great movies in my teen and early 20s years, especially when I was at university, where the music was just so distinctive and so powerful that it affected me. And it became like a kind of a passion point. I remember seeing A Clockwork Orange and being blown away by the music and the juxtaposition of like this really upbeat, positive, beautiful, uplifting, warm music being used in ultra-violent scenes. And that just completely messed with me and turned me inside out.
In a good way.
In a great way, like in a distinctive way, where I was feeling emotions that I wasn't sure I was supposed to be feeling, but was like really pleased to be feeling that, you know, and that was all in reaction to art, you know, visual context with sound. I was a big Martin Scorsese fan, and, you know, films like Mean Streets and Goodfellas, arguably some of the best music used in film. And that vision and that kind of passion that he had with how music would drive his scripts, his storyboards, his concepts, that really appealed to me. So in picture was something I was really into. Music and advertising, I wasn't into at all. I didn't really care, and I couldn't give a shit about it. As a musician, I was really interested in kind of both sides of the equation. I was a trombone player playing in a band. I'd gone to a music high school. I studied music at university. I was a music major, music and political science, or music and politics.
Yeah.
And always passionate about it. And I thought like pretty talented and smart about it, good at it. So I was looking to kind of find something pragmatic or practical to apply my musicality to. And I didn't have great connections in the business.
Right.
I got into the business in like the mid to late 90s.
You're in New York?
In New York, yeah. Based out of Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a network. I didn't have family in the business or anything. So I started to just reach out to different companies and say, look, I'm someone who has some production experience. I've done a lot of touring. I've been a band leader. I've written music, any job opportunities. And interestingly, something just fell in my lap. It was the world of music and advertising. A guy that owned a music company in New York, an original music house that had been like kind of a pretty well-known one that was, waning a bit. He had reached out and he's like, why don't we give this a try and take a look at it? But, this was after sending out hundreds, if not thousands of like CVs and resumes and notes to people. So I got my foot in the door at this one place and I learned about the business really quickly. And something that I kind of didn't really like and have a lot of interest in became more interesting to me, because at that time there was a lot of great original music being created. And I was hired as a music producer rather than a music supervisor. Music supervisor does a lot of what a music producer does as well, or has done in media, which is putting together live sessions, organizing them, mixing them, dealing with all the financial considerations and the rights, etc. But it was mostly about creating the original music, whereas maybe a music supervisor is more about licensing and procuring music that exists in culture, right?
Right.
So I was really fascinated with all the great musicians that would do these sessions, people that I, as a music geek and a lover of music, really respected, the people that played on these major records that I loved, in popular music, in funk music, in jazz and soul and reggae. They did these sessions during the day. So I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And I then went from one music company to another. The first one was called JSM. The second was called Tom and Andy, two guys named Tom and Andy, all one word. And they had done also an array of work, not only in advertising, which was like their bread and butter where they were making their money, but TV, film, fashion shows, installations at museums or art galleries.
Wow.
And it was a really cool experience to kind of see all that, knowing that it was mainly funded from advertising work. And that was the pragmatic kind of epiphany that happened in my mind. I was like, can try to be really creative and do great work, but there needs to be kind of a way of substantiating it financially. And that money coming from the corporations, although, it's coming from the man, the evil corporations, it still offers like a great foundation and a sustainability to this process of being a music producer / music supervisor. So I did that at the second company, Tom and Andy. Then an opportunity opened up where they needed someone to be a music producer on staff at Young and Rubicam in New York, one of the big major ad agencies that was on Madison Avenue, which was the main kind of centripetal force, if you will, of advertising in America. It was all on Madison Avenue.
Right.
And I got a job there and I got involved and it started to really change. The dynamic changed, and it was more and more about not creating original music, but licensing music that was relevant in culture, like I alluded to. Right. More of the role of what a music supervisor had done traditionally in film and was starting to do in television.
Right. When did that change? Like what years are we talking when that shift you noticed happened?
I think the perception of the shift was happening towards the end of the 1990s into the early 2000s. And something that had happened in that period of time, which was really interesting. Sorry about all the New York sound effects here. It's cacophonous when the emergency vehicles go by, and it's a little bit disturbing, but certainly during COVID, like the prime of COVID, it was every 2 minutes.
For sure.
1 minute to 2 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, it was bad. Now it's like every, I don't know, sometimes it's like 3 or 4 in an hour, but sometimes it's much as one every 10 minutes. But all that being said, there was a big ad that happened for Volkswagen. They were doing their first advertisement on the internet, and it was for a car that they had that, you know, the top came down, maybe the cabriolet. I can't remember the name of it, Cabrio. And they used that song Pink Moon by Nick Drake, which was, Nick Drake was kind of like a cult followed posh British folk singer that had stage fright. He was signed by Chris Blackwell to Island Records in the early 70s.
Right.
Not a lot really happened for him in his career, but this use of this, he had actually committed suicide. And 25 years after his suicide, Volkswagen used this particular song in an ad. And I think it caused a reassessment for a lot of people, especially independent artists and alternative artists that were kind of like, advertising, screw that. Why would I get involved with advertising? But they saw something that was really artful. And again, they reassessed it, and that kind of opened the floodgates. And I think that's when kind of the role of the music supervisor in advertising became a lot more prominent. There had been TV shows that were using great music, including like The Sopranos or 6 Feet Under, you know, the kind of the beginning of this golden age of television.
Yeah.
People in film obviously had been using music supervisors to an extent, like someone like Quentin Tarantino had Mary Ramos and other people that were doing work for him. Some of the best Scorsese films were using music supervisors. All the big music kind of, you know, soundtracks to like movies like The Big Chill and other things where they would use it, classic Motown, classic soul, like feel-good music, Garden State, all that. It had been happening in film for some time. Then it kind of got to TV with these really specialized original programming. And then once this thing happened with Nick Drake in that era, 1999, 2000, the role of a music producer in advertising started to become more known as the role as music supervisor. Right.
That's interesting. It's interesting that you pinpoint it to that one ad and song as well. So is that how you then, did you kind of take that moment and be like, oh, this is where I'm going to go now?
Well, I definitely preferred the space of creating and producing music in the studio with musicians, because that was my passion point. And I was like a trombone player, and, you know, most of the work you did was with other musicians, you know, women and men that were like talented and in an interaction.
Yeah. No one's doing just trombone solos.
Very rarely, you know. I mean, can you name a famous trombone player yourself?
I actually played in school, but no, I can't. Apart from my teacher, Mr. Jones, I can't name a famous trombonist.
Yeah, there aren't that many. There's a guy called Trombone Shorty who actually just played in Brooklyn this weekend from New Orleans.
Nice, but he had to put trombone in the name so everyone knows.
He did. Yeah, you know. Then there's like the guys that played with James Brown, Fred Wesley, who played with Maceo Parker with Fred. There aren't that many trombone players. So like for me, it was always about kind of the, I don't love using the word organic, but it was like the live performance recording thing. That's what I grew up on. But I loved music that was famous in culture for one thing, had an associative power, and then was getting reappropriated for something else, and all of a sudden took on this different role.
Nice.
So once the floodgates opened and this reassessment happened with this Nick Drake Pink Moon track and this Volkswagen thing, I fully embraced it. And I started to become a lot more expert in the business side as well. So, you know, the left brain aspect where, you know, negotiating music rights, what are the appropriate fees, crossing the I's, crossing the T's, you know, making sure everyone's getting paid correctly. Is there a union ramification? What are the talent ramifications? All that had always been a part of my production skill set. But when it came to licensing, it was like a much more broad thing. And, you know, that industry developed too. So when I first got into being a music producer / supervisor in advertising at Young and Rubicam in 1998, I don't know how many people were doing it globally, but I would guess under 100 people globally. You know, in the US, maybe like 50, 60, 70. Now I think there's thousands, if not tens of thousands that are people that are monetizing their musicality in this space of music supervision, licensing, synchronization. So yeah, the word sync was not a word that was used to describe it, the process. It was just called music licensing. Sync just kind of resonated and took form in culture. just like the name music supervisor did.
Right.
And it was great. Not only did the floodgates open for independent artists, but it really did open for people that had curational taste-making skills, that can compile really great playlists, that can come up with excellent music ideas for advertising and for media. And Apple Music and the iPod and the iTunes thing, that was a revolution. And artists were getting broken like crazy. They were getting the Apple bump, they called it. And it continues to this day. It's a different, more distinctive type of advertising, where it's not really only about the music. It's about so much more. It's about the product and the specifications and the benefits of the product and what it can do. But music became really important in the early 2000s. And at that point, then I was able to shift jobs to become the head of music at Gray Advertising, which was traditionally an account-driven, non-creative agency. And that was trying to become creative. And I worked there for a few years. Then they had a regime shift, and they brought in this younger creative guy named Tor Niren, who flash forward to today is running all of Apple's advertising and marketing communications. He's got this huge job, and he helped turn the agency around. And I had a lot of great opportunities to speak publicly about music and advertising because it was such a big part of the discussion. And there was such a growth in the industry, and then all the money that people were paying for these licenses, and all the people and the record labels and the publishers that were getting attention because of it all. And these shifts, these kind of radical shifts that are things that I had kind of been pointing to. So it was a really nice kind of role for me. And I was able to put together these young teams of stealth music men and women. And it's been a really nice career. I was at Gray for 14 years. I was at Young Movie Camp for 7.5 years. So that's already over 20 years on the advertising agency side.
Yeah.
Then right before COVID, the timing was weird. I decided to leave and start my own consultancy, Brooklyn Music Experience, to kind of spread my wings a little bit. And, you know, because I had a nice reputation in the business, it kind of made sense to maybe go out on my own at this point. And I did. And I have a bunch of different clients that I've worked with, different types of projects, whether they're music supervision or just literally consulting people on how to connect for different types of business, how to make their brand run more efficiently on the music side, understanding music rights, helping startups or AI companies kind of connect into business and strategically kind of develop. And I've done a bunch of that and teaching, and then one-on-one kind of consulting / coaching. The problem was I started that right before COVID with no idea that COVID was on the way. So, you know, when COVID came, it was kind of like, picked a great time to start a business. But it actually worked out fine. It was just like with everyone, the first few months, maybe from like March, April, May, June of 2020, you know, for about 3 or 4 months, it was kind of confounding. And it's like, what do you do? How do you sustain something or grow something? So that was a real kind of mind fuck for me. I'm sure for everyone else.
For sure.
But yeah, I've come out of it, you know, things are going well, doing some really good work. And that's kind of that's been my trajectory. It's been like 20 plus years. It's pretty long trajectory.
Yeah. And really interesting how quickly and magnificently the advertising and music business grew, kind of because there is that commercial aspect to it. But yeah, this is the first time I've had a music supervisor on the podcast to talk about advertising. Like everyone prior, we've discussed a film they've done or a TV series. And I think the initial like general perception of music supervision that people have is that association with film and TV. And as you've kind of explained it's obviously such a rich part of advertising too, because it's such a strong emotional tool. So Josh, it'd be great if you can tell us a bit about kind of music supervision in advertising, how it works and like what the process is, and then I guess how it differs from supervision for TV or for film.
Well, I definitely will. And before I get into that, what was interesting about the advertising music space is that jingles were like the prevalent mode of communication. Oh, yeah. Right. And there was a real cheesiness and a lowbrow kind of aspect to it, even though some of the best musicians in the world singers, players, composers were working on stuff like this and getting paid well. It was kind of all behind a curtain, behind a screen. Some people were proud of it and bragged about it, while others just kind of like didn't really say much, even though they were making good money from it. And I came into the business as a music producer, junior music producer, at the tail end of that space. And I think the jingle was an important communication tool, and it was a great branding tool, because music does stay with you longer than any other sensory input. So like if you're thinking about literally branding something, if you come up with this little like earworm or brain fungus, which are words that I've used before, that has like the name of the product in the song, it's almost like Pavlovian. It's like ringing a bell, jingling a bell, and it creates this reaction, and music kind of creates a permanent resonance in your brain somewhere in your frontal cortex or wherever it is, and it just stays with you forever. So that's why it was really successful, but really frowned upon, I think, by the music elite or people that were more successful in the recording industry or in film and TV, because it was a higher form of art. Then when that shift happened, you know, not only with the Pink Moon thing, but other things started to reassess when original music was getting replaced by music that was relevant in culture, right? So all that being said, there's still original music that's done. Once in a while, there's a jingle, but a lot of what goes on is licensed music from culture. And the process is interesting, and it's definitely distinctive from film and TV. And I'm glad you asked that. Film and TV, there's usually like a executive producer or a showrunner that is kind of the ultimate voice. There's no corporate client, right? There's no like team of collaborators as there are in advertising, where you will have all your internal collaborators, people that are producing / making that piece of content, whether it's film, digital, broadcast, whatever. The account people that are kind of like the liaisons they're the suits that are liaisons to the clients who are suits, essentially, right? So they're kind of dealing with the business interactions. And then you have the creative team, the people that are coming up with the ideas. And there's a bunch of creative people involved. You know, it's a copywriter and an art director. Then there might be an associate creative director, then a creative director, then a senior creative, global creative, chief, blah, 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 you know, just so much stuff. So it's tons of people that need to show their relevance. They kind of need to add their spice to the soup to show that they have taste, to show that they are creative and are helping. So it's a big collaboration, whereas in film and TV, there might be a music supervisor, there might be a showrunner or a producer, but that's about it, you know?
Right.
So the approval process can be mind-boggling. It could be a total mind fuck, to use a word that I like. Too many people at times. What I always try to do as a professional is find out and kind of connect with, in a trustworthy way, the people, find out who, and connect with the people that were the decision makers, the ultimate decision makers, just to kind of streamline the process, because you might get something approved by one team and then it goes to the next level and then it gets shut down. So then you have to go back to the drawing board and start again, then go up all the approval things. So there was a real political aspect to it, and corporate political aspect. And people have trouble talking about music at a corporate level. It's not all creative people. A lot of them are super corporate people that don't understand music, or if they do, they don't know how to communicate it. So the role of a music producer supervisor is not only that of a music translator and a music curator and someone who understands music rights and how to work with musicians, but it's also like someone who can talk the corporate talk and walk the musical walk at the same time. Right. And that makes it distinctive. Film and TV might have a corporate side. There might be the ultimate studio people at the top of the food chain that are part of it. But I think advertising is definitely a lot more complex.
Right. Okay. And so how does the kind of process work with those various levels there? I think the interesting thing that you highlighted there is that, I mean, ultimately, even the bigwigs at like a Hollywood studio still are working towards the benefit of like the project, where I suppose you're kind of identifying different interests that people have in like the advertising side, whereas someone just wants to sell t-shirts or whatever it is, and you have to appease them with the music. someone has like the creative ideas, and so there's all these different bits to juggle. So how do you kind of work through, what does it look like from the start to the kind of end of that process?
It's always a process. The process it's distinctive each and every time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you average out all the different things over the years that I've worked on, and I've probably produced or supervised over 10,000 tracks. It's been that many things, you know,
Wow.
Whether they're really small or really big, whether it's a small piece of media, you know, an Instagram posting to a film or an ad campaign or even a recording label, major recording label production.
Uh-huh.
They're vast. What I've always found is that there's usually a really good idea that needs music, and it's kind of aligning with the people and their vision in either helping them kind of come to a solid kind of interesting place from their musical point of view and their vision, and helping them kind of guide that, or just executing something. They already have the idea. They're like, yeah,
Right.
We love this song. Love the One You're With by Stephen Stills. I don't know why that song came to my mind. And we want to license it, or we want to do a cover of it. Instead of a man singing, we want a woman singing it, and we want her to have like a real throaty, solemn voice, not be optimistic, kind of a juxtaposition, you know, and then figuring out how to do it and executing it and getting the right people, getting the rights and all that. Then other times people have no clue and they just explore, and music is kind of thrown in at the end, which happens more times than less, and it's unfortunate. So like a concept is created, a commercial is shot, they have a piece of music that they're editing to in the editorial suite, and they love that music, and they're like, all right, we want this music. Can you get us this music? I'm like, I don't think I can. I think it's too expensive. I don't think we could do anything close to it. It's too well known. And that's the normal process, and it happens kind of almost most of the time. A very high percentage of these jobs happen this way. And it's disappointing because you feel like, as a music producer or music supervisor who's been doing it for years, you feel like people should know that they can't do music that's similar to something else, or they probably can't get a song that they really love and culture easily at a low budget. You know, that people have devalued music and they don't understand the value of it. That all being said, you try to come up with the best solutions that you possibly can. Try to be as open-minded as it possibly can. Sometimes you find people that are like really visionary and they just have one solitary point of view and they're not going to budge on it, and it's going to be a hurdle, and you know that job's going to be difficult. But mainly it's an idea comes to you as a music person internally at an ad agency through a producer that's about to put together a production. And my hope, the best case scenario, is that the creative team or the ideators will sit with me or my team and will help early on in the process think about music. Maybe music can inspire their idea. And when music does inspire the idea, it seems that those are some of the most successful executions. And I've seen a lot of awards and participated in a lot of award shows globally on advertising. Advertising is a huge ego. They have a lot of award shows. And a lot of the great stuff comes out of those ads where music is part of the ideation.
Right. Versus if it was after the fact, it's very obvious.
Yeah. Sometimes after the fact it works.
Right.
But when it doesn't really resonate, you know, like it's kind of a throw on at the 11th hour. It's just not as good. It can be. Sometimes the magic happens. But I would say it's rare that the magic happens as much as when music is part of the ideation early on.
Okay. Cool. Josh, you mentioned a bit before the notion of the music industry kind of turning its nose up at advertising world that was formerly jingles, but even still after that. And this idea of like not selling out was definitely wedged into the bedrock of like what it means to be a true artiste. And these days we've definitely seen how for artists and labels that syncs have become one of the big revenue drivers for them. And the idea of an artist being associated with a brand is now more a rule than the exception, whereas maybe it was the inverse before. But I'm curious, like, do you still run into this problem? And like, if so, how do you like negotiate it?
That's a great question, man. I don't run into it as much In fact, hardly at all. But I could tell you over the years, I've had long conversations with artists that were emerging or established, talking about their fear of getting into this thing. And two interesting stories. One was with the band They Might Be Giants, who you may or may not be familiar with. You know, they had a great career as a kind of indie alternative band that was really creative. Then they did a lot of children's music, interestingly.
Oh, right.
Because I had kids, and I made sure I had all those album CDs, whatever, and really interesting, distinctive stuff from like the regular kid stuff. Then they became like film and TV composers, and the song the show Malcolm in the Middle they did that music. So they were kind of versed in the music and media space, but they were really averse to getting involved in advertising. And I remember having this long conversation with one of their two leaders, or John and John. I can't remember which one it was. You know, and then they finally ended up doing it, and then doing a lot more work in the space. And you know, I think now as the tide turned, they felt like, okay, cool, we took a risk, but it worked. The other person who I had these deep conversations with was a guy called will.i.am from from the Black Eyed Peas, before they were well known. And he said to me, yeah, it's going to ruin our reputation. We have like a reputation in the music community as like this really cool band, you know, kind of underground, percolating. And I was like, to be honest, man, the only reason I know about you guys at this point in time, this is early 2000s, was I knew Macy Gray had worked with you, and I'm a big fan of Macy Gray, and your name came up, and then we reached out to you. And, you know, you flash forward 15 years from that point, they became probably the most corporate band in the world. They did so many different ads, and then they got involved with corporations, and will.i.am, or Will Adams, you know, he was a creative director, an executive consultant at companies, like computer companies, tech companies, and he made a whole fortune off of it.
Yeah.
But I think every artist kind of, at some point, felt that it was an inappropriate thing to do. Very few have held on. Neil Young is one who just was refused to do stuff like that.
Right.
Some were very vociferous about it, and then just kind of gave in because they had to make money. But now, you know, I taught one of my music in the media classes this week as a professor, and the topic was music and branding this week. And one of the students is like, yeah, I never realized that it was unacceptable for people to, you know, she's younger, maybe 18, that it was unacceptable. It was considered a sellout. Like, that's amazing to me to hear this history and your point of view on it and these conversations that you've had. And I'm like, yeah, it really was a thing. And the way you pointed it out in the question, it did seem lower brow to do music for an ad, and especially a jingle, which was like a hooky, cheesy, kitschy thing for the most part. Some jingles became hit songs, you know, like the Coke jingle, I'd like to teach the world to sing. And then there was a Gatorade jingle about Michael Jordan called I Want to Be Like Mike. So some things kind of resonated, but definitely as cooler music came into the foray, and you were like, man, look at what Apple's doing. It's incredible. And Billboard magazine for years and years did this thing called maximum exposure. It was like the thing being like an edition once a year. And I remember the first year it came out in 2008. It was the top 100 ways for an artist to gain exposure. Number 100 of the top 100 was getting your song on terrestrial radio. And number 1 was getting your song in an Apple TV ad. That was the number 1 way of gaining exposure. So, you know, the tides turned pretty quick. And when you see a really cool execution, like an Apple Feist or Yale Naeem or Coldplay or Chairlift or U2 or Jet, especially the one that Jet did. Yeah. It was badass, man. And it's just like, I want to do that. Like, that's new, that's cool, that's sexy, that's alluring. That band got broken because of this. I want to do it. So that had a lot to do with the change.
Nice. No, that's really interesting. And it's that, even what you referred to just then, the maximum exposure thing, like 100 being radio and 1 being the ad. Like, do you feel that the tide shifted and so did like where the money was made? So like generally speaking, these days, most artists don't make a living off streams or album sales or whatever. So it then normalized the other ways of making money, including advertising sync deals.
Yeah. And it's basically been music in the media that's been the great way for people to monetize. Right. Film, television, placements, gaming, advertising. And think about social media and what goes on in social media, which is incredibly fascinating and just incredible to me how it has shifted radically in the last few years.
Yeah.
Certainly streaming has saved the recording industry. It tanked for about 14, 15 years, and then it's come up and they're starting to make profit. Most of it comes from streaming. A bit of it comes from sync, but it's all surrounded by and enhanced by social media. And the people that have success in social media, the outliers on the music side, it's all really about branding, and it's creating a buzz and a marketing buzz around yourself. So in a way, it's kind of like stealing from or borrowing from kind of the processes, of music and branding, and how people have been able to establish themselves, create music discovery, do short form uses of music, 15 or 30 seconds. That's what social media is. It's kind of imitating it to an extent. When there are successes in music, it comes from that kind of imitation or derivation, if you will. So even though it was considered selling out, if you want to have success in social media, it's all about selling out or selling in, depending on how you phrase it. So I've been fascinated by that recently, how the branding music equation is analogous to the social media music equation. For the most part.
I'd love to talk to you about that in a second, but I'd really love to talk about a specific ad you've worked on, Josh, as a kind of case study. And you can describe this better than I, but it was a Yahoo ad with Tank and the Bangers, and it was kind of like an unbranded ad, and they were singing with the band and their family and stuff, what the world needs now, kind of at an opportune time during the pandemic. So how did this come about, and what was the process?
It was a great process. It's one of the best ones I've worked on, and I've worked on some pretty amazing integrations of music with talent and brands. This was supposed to be just recording the song for an ad campaign for Yahoo about love and how people feel love for certain things in life. And they were going to show these kind of creative, artistic, graphic execution, slow-mo of just these passionate things in people's lives. And they were going to use Tank and the Bangers version of the song, which we produced for it. What happened was COVID came. We recorded it in January of 2020 in New Orleans, where Tank and the Bangers are from. And this was if not the mecca of me.
Kind of before.
Right before,
yeah.
Yeah. Right as Mardi Gras was starting. And as you probably know, Mardi Gras created just an awful amount of COVID cases because everyone's partying together and stuff. So we somehow escaped that because it was early Mardi Gras. And I guess the virus hadn't really permeated into the US at that point. Yeah. But we recorded this version of the song. They brought in a lot of family and friends, some pretty well-known New Orleans people. It was kind of like what the world, We Are the World kind of execution, right? But on a smaller level for New Orleans. So because COVID came, they decided they couldn't release the spot. It just didn't make sense. But we had shot B-roll of the sessions, and there was a video of it. So it became a non-branded thing where, although Yahoo had paid for it and stuff, we asked the artist to release it on their Instagram and their social media, the video.
Just in the studio.
Yeah, and it's a live, it's like a 5 or 6 minute version. It's pretty, the person who shot it off the cuff did a really nice job. It captures a lot of emotion. And we released it right around the time when Black Lives Matter in the US was really peaking, and globally it was becoming such an important thing after George Floyd. So it was this confluence and synchronicity of a whole bunch of different things. And it was released unbranded, thanking Yahoo for sponsoring it or putting it together on social media, but that was the extent of it. And it got a ton of impressions and it did really well. And I think that's what I'm always trying to do, is create a piece of music that's going to resonate in culture, hopefully outside of the brand. It's really hard to do. That's always been my challenge. And that's always been kind of my mantra. It's like, can I create a hit song through an ad that resonates in culture?
Yeah. No, it's really cool. And I imagine that it being unbranded allowed for more creative freedom and artistic integrity. But being the supervisor and I suppose being a conduit between labels and the music side and with the brand or agency, did you have someone to then, like, it's harder to attribute Yahoo's brand uplift or awareness from like an ad that doesn't even really reference them? Like how do you then kind of speak to the success as it pertains to the brand following like its launch?
That's a great question. It's the amount of impressions really, and the fact that it created a buzz within culture. That's how you measure the success. I don't know if there are metrics for that necessarily, but I believe there are. I've worked on a bunch of things where the campaign permeated culture in such a meaningful way, and it ended up winning a lot of awards and kind of recognition, and they had metrics for it. They're like, well, this commercial concept was just mentioned on the late night show with Jimmy Kimmel, or mentioned on Fox News or Sky News, or it was mentioned in The Guardian, and they have like these different kind of metrics for it. Therefore, the value is 312,000 euros or 215,000 pounds. I don't know how they determine that. I'm sure it's bullshit, but there are ways of expressing that. And I think it generally comes from do people know about this amazing cover by this amazing band, this emerging band, Tank and the Bangles? And can you believe that guy sang on it, the guy from this band or the guy from that band, or the woman, the spoken artist? And look how many impressions there are on social media. There's like 1 million impressions. That's a pretty huge thing. And the brand is associated with it. Yeah. And the brand released it, even though they could have released commercials with it. They decided it was such a meaningful thing. I could speak for the client. And when he left that session, he's like, this is the most meaningful thing I've ever worked on, even before they knew they weren't going to release the ad and just the song. So, sometimes it's that magic. And I always say synchronicity and serendipity. And that's really what happened here. It was like great timing. Even though the commercial wasn't to be released, it still came out, and it was exciting as hell for me, and great to collaborate on.
No, that's really beautiful. And it's clear, like, through even the passion that you talked about that ad with, is that you're fundamentally a lover of music. And like, how does being a lover of music or a creator of music sit with its use for commercial imperatives through advertising, most obviously, but through other branded content and stuff, but both personally for you and for artists too? Yeah,
I mean, as we talked about a bit, there's been a shift in the perception, for sure. And like the student who I had who's 18, she had no idea that it was kind of like a taboo thing to do music and stuff. And what's interesting about it too is kind of these brand partnerships aspects of the music industry offer a lot of opportunity for employment for like creative marketing oriented music people. There's just a whole lot more opportunity in the business than there was. And because of its unification with tech and social media, or it's kind of like balancing with or alignment probably being the best word, it's opened up this whole kind of like industry. It's not a cottage industry, it's like a major industry. So there have been some positives to it. From a spiritual aspect, for me, in the beginning, I really didn't feel good doing it. It started to feel better when I aligned with great musicians, some of the people that I idolized that I saw were working on it, and I got to work with them in the studio. Then as it became an important way for artists to make money, I've always believed, to me, that that's one of the more important things to me that I'm helping people earn some money.
Yeah.
And then I'm also able as a music person to sustain a career and monetize my musicality and creativity. I never thought that I would be able to. The expectation always was that I would be a struggling musician and then have like side hustles to support my music stuff. But the fact that I was able to have some successes in it and speak about it and create a career around it and a profile and, you know, be respectful of others and gain respect. For me, it's been a positive thing overall. I can't say I love the interaction between the corporate side and the music side. Corporate people don't always know how to communicate about music or respect it and the value of it and the process.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's not their focus generally.
It's kind of where you come in though, right, isn't it?
Exactly. And offer kind of some insight and some access and some expertise. But I think for artists that have been around for quite some time, it was a really tough thing to embrace because of the jingle and how the jingle was perceived.
Yeah.
But think about like the need to monetize or the hope to have like security and success in the space, and how so many major artists from the era of the 70s and 80s where they had their successes, even the 60s, they've sold their catalogs, right? There's been this major acquisition of, it's been like a trend for the last 2 or 3 years, people just buying up catalogs, whether it's tech-driven companies or finance aided companies, private equity, or whatever it is. You know, Bob Dylan, Stevie Nicks, David Crosby, Neil Young, you know, they're selling out, right? Even though it's something they were against, they are, and it makes sense, but that's what it is. And the concept of selling out, I don't know, I think of it more as selling in because it's a different environment, it's a different opportunity. There's a guy, Bill Withers, who's one of my favorite artists. He had the song Lean on Me and so many others. And there's a film called Still Bill. It's a documentary. It didn't get a mass release. It's excellent. You know, I just loved it. And he talked about, he's like, well, you know, when you see sold out on a store in a window, a big sign, you're like, oh man, those people are doing pretty damn good. So like, there ain't nothing wrong with the concept of being sold out or a sellout. And yeah, I mean, if you're going into music for the purest of intentions, you're doing it for your love of music. But I don't think anyone, once they start releasing their music and marketing their music, they're not pure anymore. You know, they've shifted that purity to a monetizational kind of endeavor.
Yeah. And that's okay.
I mean, if you want to make money, you know, it's like me. Like I wanted to sustain a career in music. Odds were against me. It didn't seem like something that I could do. I didn't know the right people. I didn't have family in the business. So when I was able to do it, you know, I had a sense of pride. And it's hard. It's really, if everyone could do it, I think a lot more people would go into the music business. It's just, you know, if you come from like a family that's rational and reasonable, they're always trying to dissuade you from going into the music business.
Yeah, and it's a sign you've done well, as Bill said.
Yeah.
But yeah, you really touched nicely on the fact that it is a new world. And just to kind of wrap up, Josh, like, where do you think this just gorgeous interplay of music and advertising or branded content or social media or like whatever the fuck that looks like in 10, 50 years time will go? And how do you think supervision in this space will change with it?
I think AI is going to be just a huge part of all of this. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, and curation happens these days mainly through AI. So my thought is, as I alluded to before, see how social media has embraced kind of like the tenets of branding, right? Especially as music and brands go together and kind of marketing and getting exposure and sustainability, resonance in culture, meaningfulness in culture. So I think branding and music, brands and music, advertising, it's going to be around forever. It's just going to be curated probably not as much by people as it is going to be by machines. that's an easy answer. And I think everyone that's kind of in the space would agree. However, the human touch is significant. Music composition through AI is going to take a long time before that really kicks in to a meaningful, expressive place. But I do see kind of the role of the outlier curator as always being something that's going to be important. And when I say that, I mean, there's always some trend breaking or trend creating thing that pops into culture, like that thing with Nick Drake that I pointed out. Yeah. Right. Where it was just like, holy shit, this is cool. And, it was curated. It wasn't done by a music supervisor. It was actually from some of the creative team that was there. But they're going to continue to be these outlier situations that are kind of breaking the mold, breaking a trend, badass, super cool, undeniably great at a mainstream level, as well as like an alternative creative level. And when that happens, people follow that trend. And I would suspect that that's going to continue to happen because of human decision-making and taste-making and gatekeeping. If it starts to happen with machines, then people are just going to dig in even deeper with the machines and rely on that. But I feel like the stuff that's going to buck trends and be outlier is going to be human inflicted, and it'll continue on hopefully for a bunch of years. I'm not sure that the role of the music supervisor in advertising is ever going to become as important as the music supervisor role in film or TV. But there was a time when people were paying a lot of attention to the advertising music supervisor, and it was mainly because of these outlier scenarios that were popping like 1 or 2 or 3 a year. A couple Apple ads, a Nike ad, a really cool thing for BMW, some great song that was created for an ad that just like exploded for Honda, or for like, there was the travel authority of like Australia they did a campaign within the song was called Dumb Ways to Die. And it was really great. And it kind of permeated into mass culture. So those things I think are going to continue to happen, and it's more acceptable than it certainly was 20, 30, 40 years ago. So I'm bullish on the future of it, but I think machines are going to take control over a lot of it.
Okay. Partly relieving, partly scary.
Right? Like look at Spotify, and it was about playlisters, and they were like the famous kind of gatekeepers and tastemakers and the most important people in music. And now it's the algorithm that's kicking their ass. Careful.
Totally.
It's kind of a crazy scenario. Yeah.
That's been super interesting. Last one, I want to know what your favorite, if it's not the Nick Drake one, what your favorite sinking in advertisement is of all time.
That's a great question.
Maybe even one of your own.
Yeah. I worked on one that helped change my career a bit. When I was leaving Y&R, we had Sony Electronics was our client. Sony Electronics was getting its ass kicked by Apple and all that stuff. And the iPod completely destroyed the Walkman. Remember, the Walkman was like the first thing. I don't know if you remember it, but it certainly was. It was like the bomb. It was the outlier. It was like the harbinger, whatever. We were doing a thing about a guy who's rich and sells his company and then goes up in a spaceship and videotapes it. And, the line at the end of the commercials, when the kids ask where the money went, show them the tape. And we use the song Carry On by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. It's the first song on the Deja Vu album. And it's a really nice, uplifting song. Found an artist who I knew who had sat in with my band a few times, who had gotten a record deal and then left a record deal with a major. She was really cool. Her name's Alana Davis. And we did this cover version of the song, and it was just so good. And we released a commercial, got a lot of responses, people asking where they could buy it. So we synergized with Sony Music on the label side, Columbia Records, the famous recording label that had Miles Davis and all, so many different people, Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, blah, 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 blah. Convinced them to release a CD single of the song, as well as offer a download at the end of the commercial when it was going to be broadcast on the Super Bowl, right, which is like the big commercial day of the year or week of the year. or month of the year for advertising. And we did it, and they agreed to it. So we did this 60-second version of this commercial. It played on the Super Bowl. And I was like, finally, I have a great thing that I produced that's going to, so it was a music supervision, music production. We had to license the song, get the rights, do a cover of it. Then I intersected with the recording industry at a major label to have it released. A lot of press, a lot of TV interviews, performances, etc. Got a lot of buzz. People went online to download the commercial because it said, Alana Davis, Carry On, available at Sony.com. But Sony.com had not been able to embrace this digital space yet, so the thing crashed when people went to download it. And then, sadly, before it was about to go into a heavy rotation on television with a re-release of the commercial, one of the space shuttles that was launched from the US crashed, and they decided to, because of the content of the commercial, to take it off the air.
Wow.
But for me, that was like, this is like a trend breaker. This is, the New York Times wrote about it. It was on CNN, CNBC, a whole bunch of stuff. I was like, yeah, this is a breakthrough thing. And this was basically my idea. And I was able to execute it from a creative point of view and from a business point of view.
Amazing.
And I've been trying to do that a lot. The Tank and the Bangus thing I thought would be a great opportunity. And that's what I'm always kind of trying to do. This music supervision role, this experience, Brooklyn Music Experience company that I have, like, it gives me an opportunity to kind of create music in a realm that you wouldn't traditionally think of as the best way to get music out there. But I've always thought of it as an excellent kind of conduit for great music.
Amazing.
And my fingers are always crossed that I'm going to have like that big hit at some point.
No, that's really cool. Josh, thanks so much for a great chat.
Thank you.
And thank you for what you're doing in advertising. I feel like despite your portentous warning about AI, it's work like the stuff that you've done, which a little robot couldn't possibly do. So I feel like there's time yet. So yeah, thanks so much for the chat.
My pleasure.